everyone to today's workshop. We will be talking about superpowers and how you can actually develop them using CI/CD and automation, and not only for yourself, but especially to benefit your team, the people that you work with on a daily basis. So this session, if you are in the room, if you are in the Zoom, please use the chat and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background, what you're interested in, whether you work with CI/CD on a daily basis, and yeah, especially if there's something you want us to cover here today. Yeah, just say hi. Anyway, I will be introducing myself in the next slide. The way this will work is we'll be showing slides, obviously, some of them, very little slides. It's mostly going to be hands-on, showing you code, showing you dashboards, and I've also got everything prepared so that you can cover. You can essentially code along and follow along. It's also like everything that we're covering here is also written we have a GitHub repository that you fork, and it's written. You can follow along. There's copy-pastable snippets, so hopefully everyone can really get as much as possible out of this, regardless of your experience levels. And yes, obviously, please ask questions. So yeah, I'm a developer advocate at CircleCI. My name is Zan Markan, and yeah, I do build and break quite a lot of CI/CD pipelines, and I'm very excited about automation and essentially sharing my experience with folks all over the world. You can reach out to me either on Twitter or by email. My contact details are on the screen. I put most of my repositories samples that I built on my GitHub. Some of them, like, if you follow me, you'll also see when I push to CircleCI's repos, etc. Anyway, let's go on and look at what we're actually covering today. So first off, we will be spending a few minutes on setup. So make sure that you can actually get the stuff that we're talking about. You can follow along either by essentially coding yourself, building pipelines, triggering pipelines, and learning hands-on, or just following by watching me do it. There's a couple of accounts we'll be setting up throughout the workshop, and we'll be also showing you what CircleCI actually is, what it does, etc. We'll move on to very basics, very briefly. Usually, like this workshop, the way it's designed, you can start with very little experience and then build on until the advanced topics, but we will skip most of the basic stuff. People tend to have some level of experience already, so we'll skip the core concepts, really skim through it, and then jump onto intermediate CI/CD, where we're kind of talking about security, talking about kind of time saving with things like orbs, caching, and obviously also doing deployment. So the DCD part is essentially continuous delivery, continuous deployment. It's not only about running tests in an automated manner. And then we're moving on to advanced topics, which I like to call the full CircleCI. Some really cool stuff here. Test splitting, so how you can take a very long test to split it down to a very short one. Scheduling pipelines so that run asynchronously out of your flow, and also more security topics like access control, and something I'm really passionate about, the dynamic config, which is wild given if you know a lot about CI/CD and you see what dynamic config can do, it just kind of changes everything you think about of it. Anyway, as the last session, we have the assignment or a challenge. So you can win some CircleCI swag, and yeah, I'll be sharing details at the end, but TLDR, you follow along the workshop, you'll be able to complete the assignment in like very short time. Anyway, as Arya said, this is recorded. The assignment part is not going to be recorded because it's only relevant for the people who are currently listening to this now. But yeah, let's begin. Start by checking out or forking. Essentially, the best thing to do is fork the repository at this URL. You will need a GitHub account. I presume everyone has one. And you will also need the code editor. If you don't have a code editor in some circumstance, you can use the GitHub's online one. You can do everything apart from SSH from there. And we will be signing up to 3 services in addition to CircleCI, obviously. One is Sneak. It's a security scanning tool. The other one is Docker Hub, where we'll push our images. And the last one is Heroku, which will host our images as well. So, because our application is going to be deployed to Heroku and hosted from there. And none of these tools require anything other than an email address or a GitHub account. There is no credit card required, essentially. That's why we're using the tools that we are, because they're the least work required. Anyway, let me just show you the repo quickly. So if you go to this circle.ci /CICD-workshop. I might just copy it into Zoom chat for folks to copy. You can go in here. This is the repo. It goes to essentially, it's a bit.ly link, so it goes to this one, Zan Markan /CICD-workshop. The first link is actually to the slides that we're looking at, so you can actually see the slides, get them right away. And the way it's created, it's basically, you can read through it, and we have a set of copyable and pastable snippets that we will be building our CI/CD pipeline with. So to fork, you basically click that fork button and magic happens. I already have my fork because this is my repo, so I don't need to do it. But for you, you would have to fork it, and we will then set it up on CircleCI. So to sign up to CircleCI, basically you go to CircleCI.com. And if you're not signed up, this would basically say sign up or create account. In my case, I'm already signed up, so I'm already in, but it would ask you to log in with your GitHub account. So I suggest you to do this, or sign up with your GitHub account. You give it access to your repositories, and then CircleCI can actually take the code that you have. But first, fork the repo, because you will need to go into this project setting, project tab here on the left, and find this CI/CD-workshop that you forked, and click setup project. That's how it looks like. It'll show all of your open source projects that you have here. But yeah, you need to find this CI/CD-workshop, click setup project, and then it'll ask you to select your config.yaml file. The way it's prepared at this stage, you can basically just do this fastest option and specify the main branch. And that's gonna, this is a different repo, that's gonna find it, and just clicking setup project is going to start building it. And you should see something like this, a pipeline created in your dashboard for this project. I can click on it, and it has one workflow. It has a link to your GitHub commit. So this is my GitHub commit that I made the last like 10 minutes ago. And the job that is actually run. So you can see that we have like 4 minutes to run. It runs 101 tests. And yeah, it's a little JavaScript web project that gets built and tested for us. We're also storing the tests, but this is the steps that we'll take. Anyway, hope everyone is able to follow along until now, but let's talk about CircleCI a little bit. We're the leading CI/CD platform on the planet. Been around for a few years, over 10 now, and yeah, we help teams everywhere around the world build better software in a faster manner, in a more secure manner, etc. Whatever technology they're using, whether it's web project, whether it's mobile project, whether it's microservices, monoliths, we can help you build that, test that, deliver that to your end users. And yeah, we have customers all over the world to attest to that. We will be looking at the cloud-based CircleCI. There is also an enterprise solution, basically, where you self-host it. It's called CircleCI Server. But yeah, we will be just using the managed cloud service. It's free to sign up. You have a lot of free tier goodness there, and everything we'll be doing here today is available to anyone for free, basically. So yeah, if you are now following this along, make sure you go to this repo and follow the steps to fork and set up with CircleCI. Let's talk about superpowers. Why am I considering this CI/CD to be a superpower? Because if you think about how we used to write software, let's say a few years ago, 10, 20 years ago, you had to run, if you had any tests, you probably ran them locally, and then you build your software locally, and then you kind of dragged, if it was like a web application or a website, you drag that to some FTP somewhere, and that was then hosted. Very, very manual, very, very error prone. And then we started adding these automation tools that obviously remove all those errors, remove all those points of risk, and make sure that all our tests are always run every single time we want to build something, every single time we want to ensure something is going to be deployed. And then, like, as software grew, the industry grew, the complexities grew as well. So we stopped doing like static websites. We moved on to monolithic websites, and that was obviously took longer to test, took longer to build. And then you needed more automation for that, but it was still quite easy to deploy because it was just single application. And now we have this world of microservices and very complex architectures, and deploying that in a sane manner is increasingly difficult. So that's why we kind of employ more and more automation. And if you think about how difficult would it be to manage a very modern, very large, complex piece of software without automation, automation is definitely the superpower that you and your team basically leverages every day when you're doing your work. It allows you to build faster, code faster, get feedback faster, and yes, deploy more securely and create better software, all hands down. We'll be looking at the CircleCI configuration as part of this workshop. And that's essentially one config file that we have in our GitHub repository. Let me go to it. It's this CircleCI config.yaml. Let me zoom in a little bit. It's very well visible now. Oops. Yeah, it's this config.yaml, which contains descriptions of what needs to happen in this CI/CD pipeline. This can be anything: run our tests, do our deployment, do our security scans, whatever we're doing here, we describe in this configuration file. Main building blocks are these things called jobs, which is like a single piece of work, a collection of steps, commands. You can think about them as like just command line commands that you run in order in a given environment. So we can use both Docker containers or virtual machines with CircleCI. So with Docker, you just specify what type of image you're running, and that's it. With VMs, you again specify Mac OS, Windows, Linux, what you need, any other specifics that you might need, like access to GPUs or Android emulation support, etc. But yeah, this is how a job looks like: environment and steps. And this is like what you would execute a set of scripts on a single machine. And then you have these things called workflows, which execute jobs, or essentially they orchestrate those jobs. Right now, we just have the one because we're just starting out with this workshop, and this will kind of start building our thing and running our tests. Then as we go along, we will be building this workflow to be more and more complex and more realistic, closer to what you are likely to find in a bigger application, bigger organization, bigger team, essentially. The whole thing is called a pipeline, and it can be triggered by either a commit or on a scheduled basis, or through the API. So you have a lot of ways to trigger a pipeline. Usually that's triggered automatically when you push a commit. So let's do that. Let's trigger one, and let's show you how this can be done. So I'm using Visual Studio Code here, and I will just make like one extra line to the README here. I hope this is visible. I can zoom in a little bit more. Okay, yeah. I'm just using the built-in terminal. I have like one modified file. And I'm pushing that to my main branch, and that should trigger a pipeline. I can go back to my project and you can see it. Yes, here you go. It's running now, and it's building my project, and it's great. We have an assumption of how long it's going to take. Spoiler alert: it's going to take closer to 4 minutes than 10 minutes. But we'll see. Anyway, that's a way to trigger a pipeline. And what's the deal with superpowers? There is, like, obviously, I'm a bit of a Marvel fan, and I've seen most of the films. I've not seen the latest Spider-Man. That's the one that I haven't seen, but I've seen everything else. We have a bunch of superheroes that have different superpowers, and that's the analogy that I like to think of when we're thinking what benefits can you have, but from really kind of knowing how to properly wield your tool. For example, you can make your pipelines run a lot faster, and you can do that through things like orbs. We write them faster because we can reuse series of config. We'll show that in the next 10 minutes. We can employ cache. Actually, the pipeline that we already has some caching. So it kind of caches the dependencies from NPM so that you don't have to install them every single time. If you think about how many dependencies you can have, you can cache and avoid downloading it every single time. It can save you minutes or of time each time something is run. And obviously parallelism. Right now, we're just running one job, but we will be parallelizing these 4-minute test suites into a lot more parallel jobs, so that they're going to run a lot faster, significantly faster. And we also, apart from speed, we also do this. We also worry about essentially fighting the bad actors, right? Securing our world of our applications, of our teams, through the power of DevSecOps, or the magic of DevSecOps. That's nothing other than putting security outside of just this pure security domain and closer to where the development is, and applying automated steps to secure applications when they're actually being written, and not just like when we're doing a pen test before we are releasing something. We can do security scanning. We'll do that. We can store our secure API keys in a secure manner so that they're not in a GitHub repository. And we can split privilege. We can reduce privilege as much as possible so that each individual job part of this kind of pipeline will have access to only the least amount of credentials it needs. So if you're doing a deployment, you don't want, if you're doing like some tests or security scans, you don't need deployment credentials, for example. And we can do access control as well. Say who can access, who can confirm that this can proceed. You can do stuff like that. You can encode that in your pipeline, and that will then make your organization a lot more secure, because we can follow essentially whatever you need from an organizational standpoint. And then we can take control. Not all the superpowers are like some actual magic or super flight powers, but there's also a lot of tech involved, and tech that allows us to control, to have a control of the environment, like that super awesome helicarriers that they had in Avengers. And by that, I mean all the dashboards, all the information we can see about our organization, about our pipelines. We call them insights, essentially telling you this is how long your pipelines run. These are the outliers. These are the bottlenecks. These are the tests that are flaky, all the information that you have, and then export that out as well. You can get this information out using the API. You can even use webhooks to export this data of pipelines to other tools that you might be using and process them elsewhere. We can do things like shrink a lot so that we fit in a single container. By that, I mean, you can debug your pipelines as you're running them. Which is really cool, because oftentimes something breaks in our CI/CD pipeline, especially if it's a script. And what people usually do is just kind of make small commits all the time and just kind of jump through it. We don't have to do that. We can actually just jump into that running container and say, hey, this is the state that it's on. Why has it failed? Try some things. And you can actually use SSH to kind of go into a job and essentially fix it before, or analyze it, identify the problem without having to just do a trial and error, small fixes. And lastly, we'll be embracing the multiverse like they did in Loki with something called dynamic config. Because if you think about CI/CD pipeline, it's all configured, it's all tied to a commit. Not anymore. You can actually have external factors that modify your pipeline as it's being created, and that just brings up so many new possibilities, and that's the thing that we'll be covering here. But now let's look at this. We'll just look at this basic pipeline, but we'll move on to this kind of intermediate CI/CD straight away, just because I assume most people will have some experience with this and they don't need explaining what everything does. So let me open my config. If you fork this, you should have a config that looks like this. This is after this first basic chapter. So we have the version thing here. This basically just tells CircleCI what version this has to run. And then we have one job called build and test. The first thing in this job you'll see is this Docker image that we're specifying. Again, we ship a number of these kind of called convenience images. This one has Node installed, Node version 16.14.0. We ship a number of them. I'll show you where you actually find them a bit later. And everything is going to, when this job starts, it's going to spin up this container based on this image from scratch. It's an empty container, just this, and run all of that in here. Checkout is like a convenience step for CircleCI built in, and it checks out the code at this commit. And then we have a few run steps like install dependencies, which runs npm install. So this is essentially just run a single command. You can give it a name. Restore cache and save cache are what I mentioned by speeding up your pipelines analogy. So this essentially caches our node modules based on this package lock. So it just compares these package log files and stores whatever is in there. And this basically allows you to save some time. And then we're running some tests, and then we're processing those tests, processing them and storing them so that they can be uploaded to CircleCI, and you have this fancy UI. I can go back to my pipeline. If a test broke, this will show you this exact test is broken. This is the error message. If it's all green, it doesn't really show you anything because it's all green. Why would you care? We just want to know the number. And you can see artifacts and resources as well. Resources is essentially the usage of the CPU, but for now, this is just the output of our tests. What else? And obviously, this is just an npm run command. Whatever you're using, you already have probably your test runs scripted. So I'm using Mocha for this, and Mocha will run all my tests. And yeah, these are two like convenience commands that process the test results. So yeah, we orchestrate it in a workflow and we're off to the races. That's like a very basic pipeline that we will be building on top of. First off, let's introduce this thing called an orb, because we're using Node.js, and Node.js is you might have heard of it. It's pretty popular. It's pretty popular. I'm sure you've all heard of it. That was a joke, bad one. But because it's popular, we do have some convenience things available for it called an orb. So orbs are essentially a way to encapsulate and share config across pipelines without actually specifying it directly. So just gonna think about it as an equivalent to a library, a programming library, but for our YAML configuration. So by copying this orbs node, CircleCI node 500, this will allow us to use all of that goodies. And where can I find more about the orbs? Great that you asked. we have a developer hub called circleci.com/developer. And in here, you'll find this orbs tab. We can see all different things that are available. So this is our node orb. And you have a number of jobs, run and test, number of commands, install packages, install yarn. You can use yarn with it or npm, whatever you're using. Yeah, we'll be using this kind of install packages to install our packages. And we could even run all our tests automatically by just spinning up a single job, but we won't do that because it's better to show you in that way. So let's replace our caching steps with this node/install packages, because you know that like these caching steps are pretty I mean, there's a lot of code that we can just replace by just a single call. What this does is exactly the same thing. This does exactly the same thing, and you'll see that this will now work again. And in this orb, you see that my install packages is a command that takes a bunch of arguments. So it can install packages using npm, you can install packages using yarn. And then it has a bunch of like very advanced caching logic already built in. So you're basically saving a lot of time and effort by not having to do this. And this is pretty cool. So that's an orb. It will run my pipeline. Boom. Yeah, it's kind of checked for package.json, determined log file, restore cache, install packages, saved cache, and yeah, removed any links. So it does a few more steps that we don't have to worry about, and just makes our pipeline a lot tidier and neater. So now that this is working, let's look at some other things that are very common in our kind of intermediate-ish CI/CD pipelines, like security scanning. And we'll use just security scan for this, but you can think of things that aren't really test related, like maybe linting or any kind of type of static analysis or coverage checks, etc. You can do that with other like parallel jobs. But for us, we'll do this automated dependency vulnerability scan. We'll use Sneak. Again, just like I know how to set it up. I like using it. I've already got an account, but essentially you log in, you create an account using GitHub. And it's pretty easy. What you will need is you will need your API key, which I won't show because this is going on YouTube, and I don't want to. To regenerate it. Essentially, once you have your account, you go to your account settings and then copy this auth token. It's just a token string, basically 20, 30 characters, something like that. And we will be adding it to, sorry, let me go to my pipeline. We will be adding it to our project settings. So in your CircleCI project view, there is the top right-hand side, you have this project settings option. And we will be adding it as an environment variable called sneak_token. This will be available to all the jobs at runtime as an environment variable. And this is what the Sneak orb will require in order to work. Obviously, it ties you to your account. do it, give it a name, blah, 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 blah. Add environment variable, and it's going to be available for you. Let's say I've done this, and now we can just go to this sneak orb and integrate it for us. Sneak orb, oops, it's YAML, so mind the indentation. And we will also be adding our dependency vulnerability scan job. Again, this goes into the jobs, under the jobs section. We're adding a new job called dependency vulnerability scan. And the last thing to do is copy this job in this workflow for run tests. And that will be it. So let me do this. Commit this, and this will essentially add a new job for us to our pipeline, and it will automatically start scanning our project, which is good. Did I forget to commit? Internal server error on GitHub. That's good. Always want to see that when we're doing a workshop. Anyway, so this second time was a charm. So now our workflow is running two jobs. Our dependency vulnerability scan, which will do all that stuff, and it would break if any of our dependencies were like vulnerable. But because they're not, and it's a very small, simple package definition, it's going to pass. And again, it's still going to run all our tests. They run at the same time, so they start at the same time, all in parallel, so they don't have to wait for one another, which is good because any tests can just trigger at the same time, and then you get the results as soon as they come in. So yeah, that's our security scanning. As I said, you could do code coverage, you could do static analysis, linting, you could do danger checks if you use danger, anything really, and it could work. And now we'll build another job called build a Docker orb, or build Docker, for which we will need to log into Docker. And I will be logging into Docker. If you have an account for Docker, that's great because you can just use that. If you don't, that's fine as well. We will be creating this, creating a new image and pushing it essentially like this one, CI/CD workshop, which I pushed earlier. Cool. So we'll add a new job. Oh no, we need two variables again, Docker login and Docker password. So they are just your Docker username and password, so you can just grab that. But yeah, if you don't know what Docker is, it's essentially a tool for managing containers, creating containers, and what we're using here is their hub, essentially their repository of container images. We'll package our application as a container image and deploy it to the repository so that it can be used by whoever. And it's like an example of a deployment scenario. So yeah, all you need is create an account here and that's really it. And store the Docker login and Docker password again as those environment variables. Cool. So we will be doing that. So once you've done that, you can go to the orb. You can go to the config and just copy in that orb. And we will be adding a new job as well, which is called build Docker. Hooray. So again, using an image, this time is using a different image called base, because we don't need node for this. Is just what gets executed where, because we don't need node because we're just building a Docker image. And again, this is another example of what's possible. If you want to know more about the convenience images, again, you can go to CircleCI Developer Hub, and on the Images tab, you've got all those links. So we use this base one, and all the other images are based on this base one. So Node has Node installed on top of whatever it is. By default, they all have tools like JQ for JSON manipulation. They have curl, like a lot of kind of, they're all Ubuntu based images. So you have a ton of like these kind of standard development compilation tools. There's also things like MySQL images, etc. But yeah, for now, we're just interested in this base one. And I like this stable tag because it just kind of like gives you the recent one. Obviously, if you're doing production stuff, it's better to encode the actual version. So like, this is the actual version of Ubuntu. This is when it was built, so that you know exactly that it always is going to execute on this version. But for our case, this is fine. Stable is fine. But yeah, this would be equivalent essentially if we said 2022-03-2004. This would have been the same. Check again. It has this setup remote Docker because all the Docker images, because we're building a Docker image, is going to be built in a separate secure environment. And again, we'll be using those commands from the Docker orb, so Docker check and then Docker build. And you specify which image. So Docker login is my username's namespace. So Zan Markan. In my case, Circle project repo name is built into it's a pipeline. It's an environment variable that injected automatically by CircleCI, and it will be whatever your project's name is. In my case, it's going to be CI/CD workshop, and then we can add things to it. So today is City.js day. So City.js 22 and tag 0.1 and then pipeline number. So name number of my pipeline. This is not 22nd of March. But this is City.js, so I'm going to rename this properly. The last thing we'll do is add our build Docker job to this. Add requires and specify which jobs are required. Now this is going to look like more of a graph of images and of jobs as opposed to just a box of jobs, basically, because it'll only execute build Docker if both of those are passing. So this is how I kind of make this orchestration work. Commit. Cool, right. And now we can see that we have a deployment going on. Maybe. Maybe. Why hasn't this gone? Okay. So we have definitely pushed it. But because GitHub was 503ing earlier for me, sometimes things happen like yeah, it's definitely pushed. Like webhooks not triggering, which is not ideal. GitHub needs to push a webhook in order for this to trigger. Let's try another commit. The way this is orchestrated from CircleCI and GitHub is basically GitHub pushes webhooks onto CircleCI. Again, internal server error. This is not something I want to say. This is not something I want to see during a workshop. Oh, good, thanks. Okay. Oh yeah, GitHub is having issues. Thank you so much for checking. Yeah, good. Yeah. It looks like it's still having issues. Yeah, so it's not accepting my pushes, and there is not much I can actually do.
Is there something we can try, something smaller and something different?
No, GitHub is broken.
Oh, GitHub is broken.
Yeah.
Can we try to do it in something else other than GitHub?
Yeah, it would also work with Bitbucket, but I don't have it set up right now for this repo. And
or GitLab?
We don't currently have support for GitLab. So. But yeah, I will talk through this workshop a bit more, and I have previous commits and previous runs of this workshop that I can show you how they actually work. But unfortunately, I can't make those commits straight away. Yeah, we've also updated the status. Looks like. Yeah. Probably. Yeah, it's on GitHub.
GitHub is explained, but that's GitHub.
Yeah.
Packages experience degraded performance. That's the only issue they have.
Yeah, API requests. Yeah, that's basically it. That doesn't help. Okay, what we'll do is I'll talk you through previous commits that we have. So what we've done it, we've added a deployment Docker build job, essentially does a deployment. We've added it using a requires so that build and test and dependency vulnerabilities can need to execute before this build Docker can. So let's find this in a prior pipeline execution. Okay. What you're looking here at here are my scheduled pipelines, which currently aren't visible because I changed how it works and it didn't remove the actual scheduled triggers. Now I have to go through this. Can I go to main branch? Let's do success. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, so for example, this one was showing you build Docker that kind of continued only after these two were both green. And then we added another one, which I'll show you now, which essentially deploys to Heroku, which is based on that. Again, for Heroku, it's another orb, another API key, another sign up, and then another job, again, push Docker image and release Docker image, which will deploy this. And your deployment doesn't need to be to these exact environments, right? You can have a different container registry, like Amazon has one, Google has one. There is a number of these services out there, and your organization probably uses one that's a different one. So you can just rely on that. The same with where Heroku is, right? So in my case, I used Heroku because it's the easiest one to follow along without any credit card information, any other checks. But yeah, you probably use like if you use AWS, you probably can use you can deploy your application there, or if you use DigitalOcean is another good one. GCP, all the cloud providers have this, and CircleCI will work regardless of where you're deploying something. So that's kind of how this looks like. And again, yeah, to make one job require another, you just kind of add this requires step. Now let's jump to the end of chapter 2, which is the chapter that we began with because we skipped the first one, so that we have the exact same state as before. And I have a set of scripts here. Oops. Okay. Oh, this actually worked. Let me see if my pipeline is now building. Yeah, this one actually triggered, which is good. It's obviously not going to be. We renamed it to the image to be CityJS 22. It's not going to be that, but this is still going to work in exactly the same way. Cool. Now we can continue, and we're at this at full CircleCI, the advanced section. In the previous one, we covered this kind of intermediate CI/CD stuff that a lot of organizations already practice, but you might not be familiar with the entire thing. But now we will look at much more advanced stuff. I'm hoping that there are no glitches, no blips in our future, but if there are, we will work around them. Anyway, things we'll cover in this section are things like matrix tests. For example, if you are running tests against different environments, for example, in web, you obviously want to have your applications run on different browsers. You can run them on Firefox, Chrome, the version of this, maybe even Safari, Edge, whatever. You can run those in matrix. So you run your test, you write your tests once, and then specify some kind of environment differences, like actual environment differences, and this will automatically kind of spawn multiple jobs based on your parameters. We'll look at test splitting. So our 4-minute test suite is going to be split into parallel ones. So it's going to be a lot faster. And we will look at access control, etc. But let's first look at those matrix tests and test splitting, because that will usually help every single one, because I know every single person who uses CI/CD usually does testing with it. So and that's like the most common denominator. Anyway, let's find our where we were. Let's employ some parallelism, running tests in a matrix. So what we will do is we will create a new parameter for our build and test job, which will specify our node version. So let's go to our build and test job, and at the top, somewhere, it doesn't matter whether it's before Docker or after Docker, or before steps, after steps, as long as it's like the first level of indentation, it's going to be happy. We will be running our tests in different versions of Node.js, or application in different. We'll be running our application tests on different versions of Node.js. So we will be passing this node version as a parameter. The type is going to be string, because it's a string, and we will pass in the default version. Next thing we need to do is specify this, use this parameter in here. Actually, for clarity's sake, this would be better, just because we're first declaring a parameter and then we're using it. So this will essentially blow up any kind of parameters that we pass in and inject them into this string. So cng/node : and whatever we pass here. And this, if we commit this and run, this would run normally, right, like everything else. But we want to actually run them across multiple versions at the same time. So in our build and test job, we will be specifying this matrix as well, and that's within the workflow. Boom. So now we've added a colon here, and then passed in more parameters to the jobs that define in that workflow. So matrix, so create a matrix of jobs based on this kind of template, and pass in these parameters. So node version, and it's going to take an array of different strings. So 16.14.0, 14.19.0, and 17.6.0. I think this is like latest, last stable, and current stable. Okay, and by committing this, we will be adding some parallelism. Yeah, hello, this works. See, now it's actually blown up 3 new jobs. So 16.14.0, 14.19.0, and 17.16.0, and they all run in parallel. And because we still have our requires, this build Docker now depends on all of them. If tests broke on one of them, they would this wouldn't continue, which is good. More realistically, you would run them in a different web browsers or something like that. But in my case, it's a lot easier to demonstrate this on different versions of Node. And you can actually go in and see that this is spinning up this Node version, and this is spinning up the 14.19.0. Like here, you can see that. Cool. Okay, now we have our test running the matrix. Now let's split this further and make them run a lot faster. And for that, we will need to split those tests. And to split them, we will need to use CircleCI's test splitting feature. This basically takes a look of all of the tests that you have. In our case, we're looking at test files and splitting them across number of parallel jobs. So again, looking at our build and test job definition, we will replace our run step with this. Oops. I think that's it. Yeah, this will basically use a CircleCI command line tool to take all of the tests in my test directory. So anything that ends up with test.js and it's up in our test directory. And first we'll echo all the tests. I just have this for like debugging. And then we'll pass this to CircleCI test split. And then which will create me a subset of those test files, and then pass this to our npm run using Xarc. So all the test files are going to be passed at the end of this command. So this is like a kind of standard shell utility Xarcs, basically. There's a number of recipes in documentation for different tools that people might use. One more thing we need to define is parallelism. So as our tests are running for 4 minutes, I think parallelism of 4 will run them in 4 different, 4 concurrent jobs. And then we will need to adjust some stuff here around test splitting, basically, test merging, because right now, oh snap, they're going to be, when we are storing our test results, we need to process them slightly differently, just because the paths are going to be slightly out of whack, because it uses absolute paths, and this will make it use relative paths, basically. But again, there is guides for and recipes for how to do this for different platforms. It takes a little bit of fiddling, especially if there's a brand new framework, brand new tool. Someone just tweeted the other day about doing it with Jest. So Jest is sorted if you're using that. Okay, let's see if this will work. Try tests. Probably the biggest kind of change that we did. And if anything is going to break, it's going to be here. Hopefully it's not. Oh yeah, it's going to break. Or maybe it's not. I'm genuinely not sure. I think I got the path wrong. But yeah, okay, now it's running. It looks like, yeah, it looks like it's collecting them correctly. And you can see that it's created 4 parallel runs. And they're the same jobs, but they run a subset of, essentially they run a subset of jobs. And you can see like the command we're running is running this test, long running L test, long running H test, long running D test, and only 3 files are being run. Ooh, and this one broke. Yeah, of course this broke because I didn't do something right. I had a typo, which is the best type of failure. Unexpected line of file. Was this supposed to be fee? What this teaches you is a lot of bash scripting. But you can see that, so it is running A, E, I, and our sample test. And you can see that they're just named like this. And those tests, to be honest, they don't do anything. They just wait for a long time and then all pass. But for an example, this is easier. But now you can see that even though our test failed, they failed faster. Instead of running it for what, 6 minutes or 4 minutes, they ran for what, 1 minute and 20. And this is like because it splits the tests based on how long they're supposed to run. And hopefully this will pass now. And we should be happy. Now let's control our flow slightly. What if we don't want to always run our deployment? What if, for example, we don't want to deploy from anywhere apart from the main branch? And when you're working on a feature branch, like with Git Flow, for example, you just want to do it from locally. So that's why we can use these filters for branches, and by doing this, we will only do the whole deployment from our main branch. So build Docker has this filter, and yeah, this won't add actually. So create a new branch called CityJS branch and committed it with this filter. So you should see that the pipeline that gets created doesn't have my Docker deployment because it's not on the right branch. It's filtered out. That's what you can do. Again, speed up 2-3 minutes of deployment just because we don't care about it. We just want to know about our tests in our feature branches, and we only want to deploy when we're maybe ready to either do a pull request or we're ready to deploy when we are on the main branch that actually matters for deployment. Yeah, so that's basically it. Now we can change the way we are providing credentials by using something called contexts. So, oops. Is this, yeah, this is still sharing, good. So contexts are another way to store environment variables, but allow you to specify where they actually inject those environment variables much more finely. So, for example, right now with my pipeline, I can go into project settings and I can see all of my environment variables: Docker login, Docker password, Heroku API key, sneak token. But this is now accessible to every single job that we have. So my test runs are going to have credentials for Docker login and Docker password. And this is not good, because why would my test care about my deployment credentials? Imagine if this was your company's production AWS account. You wouldn't want that, would you? That's why we can create those things called contexts and store those environment variables in those contexts. I already have some created. They are organizational specific, so they're not specific to our project, so we can actually share it across different projects. So let's say that we have our workshop deployment dev context, and that one has an environment variable called Heroku API key. And basically, we will be adding this context to it, and then we will be removing that API key from the project. And it's going to work just like that. Okay, so we're adding this context now, and we will go to my, well, we will go to my project. Oh. I needed to be on the main branch to actually do this, because otherwise it wouldn't get to it. And now actually, I forgot one thing. Because we're now using a context, we can remove our Heroku credentials from there. So on variables, we can do this. We can remove my Heroku API key here. And this will delete it. So you can see now that obviously these will have spun up already. And you can see that preparing environment variable step, this basically injects all of that. And this was available to this test job. But now when we have our new pipeline triggered, in a minute, this won't be available anymore. Now, these ones will still have it because I removed it too late. But if we trigger this again, you would see it. Or if we wait like 20 seconds more, you'll see that build Docker won't have our Heroku credentials. And that's essentially what you can do to every single job. Just give it the exact amount of the exactly correct credentials that I need in order to complete the job. The same with context. You can use these things called security groups. So if you use GitHub, you have your organization, for example, whatever your company's organization is, you have like user groups in there, not just members of the org, but also what kind of roles they have. For example, you have admins, you have contributors, you have maybe you have like lead engineers that are allowed to commit to different branches and or like do certain things. For example, only allow leads to actually continue the deployment, or require someone to thumbs up that is a lead. You can actually specify who is allowed to use that context within CircleCI. Again, go into that organizational settings and is Heroku deployment or not, workshop deployment dev. Yeah, you can add like security groups. I'm using it on my own organization, so I don't have it here. But if this was an organization on GitHub, actually, I do have one. This one, for example, this one uses security groups, and you can see my deployment dev, right? This is group name dev deployers. All the people in that group are able to do it, and yeah, so you can really finally allow access control to this. In the interests of time, we won't be doing that. We won't be showing this. I showed you parameters earlier. How I can use them to run different jobs, but you don't just use it for matrices. You can actually use it for something like our deployment job. So for example, let's say we have our deploy to Heroku parameter, which has a parameter called environment. So you can have multiple environments that we're deploying to in different jobs, but still have the same definition. You can do that. So let's do that. And now we need to change. We need to change the last two steps to use those parameters. Again, the same as before. And then we pass this through. Actually, yeah, we can remove this requires, because we're going to have another production deployment as well. Let's say we have like a test deployment that will always go to your application. Of them. And now let's add a manual approval step and another deployment job for Heroku. Which is going to use this prod environment. So this one, again, has which requires this new hold for approval job, which we haven't defined anywhere because its type is called approval. And this is a special type of job which requires someone to actually log in and confirm whether they want it. And I'll show this to you now. And again, you can add context to these approval jobs as well, so that if you have like a release lead or delivery lead person in your organization, you can actually have only that person have this credential to actually approve a certain job, which is like very, very, very powerful. Yeah, only that person can then continue building this. So yeah, we have this. And then we have a new deployment job called deploy to prod. It should deploy to the prod environment, which requires my hold for approval. And push this, I can show you. I can show you project now. Here we go. So now we're doing a straightaway deployment for our kind of beta dev environment, and then doing the regular deployment flow at the end of our build with the new hold for approval job. You'll see that in what, 1 minute, 2 minutes when this build Docker has done, that we can actually go in and manually approve this job in order to continue. And this, a lot of organizations have these kind of manual requirements for this, and this is essentially just a very easy and convenient way to encode this in your CI/CD pipelines. Cool. Okay. Now let's not build something on a commit. Let's build it on a trigger. So we'll do this kind of nightly build. I've already got a trigger set up. I've already got a trigger set up, which is good. But essentially you go into project settings again, and we have our nightly trigger. Actually, it's not nightly. It only runs on a Tuesday because my last workshop was on a Tuesday. What's this? I don't know what this is. Okay, let's say once per hour at midnight UTC with a scheduled parameter, which is a Boolean. And this is a new type of parameter called pipeline parameters, which are applied to the entire pipeline. And so the whole pipeline is going to run with this parameter, and this is going to be relevant because we'll create a new workflow. You're not going to see it because we're not at midnight, but you can believe me that come tomorrow, this will have run. One more thing we need to do now that we've kind of created our pipeline is add this parameter. That was the errors that was showing you earlier because I had changed the state of this environment where this was working. So if you specify the parameter for a pipeline, and if you pass a parameter using like a trigger, this could work either through the API or through this kind of schedule, and you don't have it defined, this will fail because it's not expecting it, and it's just like, I don't want this. Why are you doing this? Anyway, we schedule this. Default is false, so if nothing is passed, if you're running on a commit, this is going to be always false, and only on a trigger this is going to be toggled to true. And now we will create a new workflow called nightly build, which will only run our tests and deploy our deployment normally. actually, no, I need to do one more indentation. Yeah, this is it. And boom, I think this is it. So we've done a new workflow called nightly build, which will run when this schedule is toggled to true, and it will run our build and test, vulnerability scan, and deploy our dev version to Heroku, so that when people come into work on the next day, they can actually see the current dev environment being deployed. Or if it failed, they know they have some work to do, which is always cool. So yeah, that's it. Oh, we need to do one more thing, because as of in this current state, this would actually run both workflows. So we need to actually add a when not clause to our run test, so that it's going to be ignored when the schedule is true. So only the scheduled one is going to run on schedule, and this one is going to run when the schedule is explicitly not set. Now you can look at my pipelines. If you go into my project, oh yeah, this is now passed. You can see hold for approval is here, and we're actually holding, and we're going to hit approve, and now it's going to go into the next deployment scenario. And this even shows who was the approver, because it was me, obviously the only user here, but if it was someone else in the organization, it would show that it's been done by that user. So, you know, you have the ability to track who made any changes, just as you would with your commit history. So yeah, this brings me to the, I believe, last bit of the session, where we will use this thing called dynamic config, and I will do something cheeky and just skip to the end and explain it to you, because I want to give you the assignment very, very, very soon. So what we will do is chapter 3 final. Okay, so what we've done now is we've made the pipeline weird and not as linear as before. So when we triggered the last commit, it actually ran this choose config workflow, which has a single job in there, path filtering. And based on the outcome of that job, it continued creating the second workflow, which is the one that we had before. And this now allows you so many more things. Let me jump into it. So config.yaml is now a lot shorter than it was. We also have this setup true, which indicates it's something called a setup workflow, which means we're using dynamic configuration and everything is wild. I think you also need to toggle this in your settings. So project settings, toggle dynamic config, and then you can use this. We have this thing called path filtering. It's like a convenience orb, which allows you to easily look at paths within your project. So for example, if you have a monorepo, you have a web application, you have a mobile application, you have an API, and it's all in one repo, you can actually filter those, saying, hey, if you're making changes to the API, build everything. If you're making changes to the web, just build the web parts. And based on what you want to build, you can actually pass into your configuration. So in this job, we're basically specifying what the base revision is. So if you're working on a branch, compare what your changes are to the main branch. Right now, my changes are all going to be on main branch, so it'll always going to do it. But in my case, we are going to pass in this mapping, the config path basically tells it where it can find the next config. And you don't have to have this now. You can have this. You can basically create this using whatever YAML builder you're using. So we actually have a config SDK that uses JavaScript and TypeScript that you can write and construct your config based on whatever arbitrary logic. Is there an API that you are actually hitting to detect something? Is there something else that you're doing? You can essentially define this however you want. It's super, super powerful. In my case, I'm basically just using it to tell it, if I make changes to any of my scripts, which are not relevant to the application, so all of my kind of prep scripts, will toggle this skip run parameter to true. And again, we'll need one more parameter. But basically, this will trigger the config that's in this file, so not in the file that we had before, and pass in this skip run parameter. And this skip run is, again, Boolean, defined at the top, default to false, and our run test is now an and not. So when it's not scheduled and it's not skip run, it will run. And here we go. Let's say that we've kind of added one more line to this. Okay. Boom. Cool. And so yeah, this is now skip the run because it doesn't have anything to change. And this was dynamic config in very brief. And now let's move on to the assignment that we have going for you. We will now stop the recording, Aris,
Yep.
because the assignment is only